when it comes to the process discussion with the board, and I just talked about it for a second, because I thought the board would have some kind of, to a certain extent, a format for how they wanted to talk about this issue. I guess one of the things that we're considering is when something happens, like the outreach committee, and I think I'll just start with like that idea. The outreach committee came up with their initial idea, which was to go to high schools and schools and set up tables and have any number of us sit at the table and with cookies or something, and just introduce ourselves to students as the CFT. To let them know that we were working on racism within the schools, shake hands, and hopefully encourage them to come and be a part of the CFT. The next idea was something, because we were running short on time for the school year, was that we would have a talking circle in JA, because I coached there, we had some connections there, and that would put us in a position where we could get 20 students together and we would talk about kind of the end of the year, what are your impressions, 7th, 6th graders, what are your impressions about JA, or exiting 8th graders, what were your impressions, and we would formulate some questions around that and kind of call it a end of the year thing for talking circle. Well, the problem that we had with that initially is like, how do we do that? Who do we go to talk to make sure that it's okay for us to go into the schools? What's that process? And so really what we were looking for was clarity from the board members as far as that goes. And then, kind of to my question there is what happens when there's something we want to act on right away. There's an event, there's an event, and maybe we want to set up a table or a booth, and we want to be at somebody's football game or something. Who knows what it could be, but that it would be. So what are the proper channels that we take as a group? And that's what we were trying to decide. And we realized we don't really have that. Who do we go to first for facilities? We never asked for a budget, right? So who's buying those cookies, right? Those kind of questions all started to kind of creep into the equation. So I'm not sure how I should start that discussion off, except for.
Do you have something to?
Well, that's part of, I think, what the board was going to talk about.
Yeah. And then we could discuss that, but then there was also the issue that we just discussed, was the idea of the request for data, right, and what that looks like procedurally, right? And I think that there's two frames of thought on that. I mean, a frame of thought from the CFT and from the board as to how that functions and how that data would be used. So. Yeah. Would you come up?
On the spot.
Deborah's like, I don't want
No.
Should we get these chairs?
Deborah, you can always say no and we can just see what happens.
Yeah. You want chairs?
Sitting is the new smoking.
No, sitting. I'm okay with standing too. I want to move up in case you guys get tired.
No, because I'm short, you haven't noticed this before, and I spent all these years in high school with seniors and senior high kids. I had to stand up when I was teaching, partly because I pace, and partly because I don't want everybody to think I'm shorter than everybody else in the at once. So here's the issue I think we've been struggling with, and Tom, I think you set it up pretty well. It seems to me, and this is just my opinion, that there is sort of a disconnect between what the committee, I don't know how the committee really feels about the school district. I can tell you how I really feel, and I think the board really feels that this district is absolutely committed to doing better. The only fact that we have achievement disparities, we have discipline disparities, we have the number of kids of color in AP classes that we should, that we have failed a number of our kids, but that we are absolutely committed to doing better. And I taught in our schools for 30 years. I have never seen an initiative that has been more strongly believed in, more strongly enforced, more supported than this one, to make sure that we do better in terms of all of our kids. All needs to mean all. We've said that for a long time, but I really believe that we really believe that, and I have talked to so many teachers in so many schools, and they believe it too, and it's hard. I mean, as a nation, we have failed our kids. Rochester isn't any worse than any other place, and that's no excuse, because I believe we can be a lot better. But here's the thing, I don't know that our committee and our district are on the same page in terms of really wanting to work together. Our district started a discussion years ago with Kwanzaa Kanjufu and Glenn Singleton about white privilege. And it was about a 3-year discussion. It was a good discussion. It was tough, but it was because we don't have the number of teachers of color that we should have in this district. Because so many of our teachers look just like me, only way younger. We needed to talk about, what does white privilege mean? What about microaggressions? What about, not understanding how race really matters? Because for me, growing up, it never did. Well, I learned better, and we had that discussion, we continue to have that discussion. Then more recently, the school district has been involved with educators, professional educators like Michael Rodriguez, who's the head of the College of Human Development and Education at the University of Minnesota, and whose main charge right now is to look at equity in schools in Minnesota. We had people like Luis Cruz and Dr. Mohammed come in and talk to our staff, teach our staff about equity. And what those guys said, and what people like Dr. DeFore and you forget names, and Robert Marzano have said, if you're really going to make a change, you have to change the culture. You have to change the way people think, the way they act, the way they teach, the way the community surrounds its kids. You have to change the culture, and you do that one school at a time. There is no magic bullet. This is the one thing that educational professionals agree on, the researchers agree on, is that there's no algorithm that works universally. You go to the school and you get people in that school committed to change. And then you find out what works for them. Because cultures are different and schools are different. So what Rochester has embraced is this idea of providing as much education as we can for as many of our teaching staff and paraprofessionals and administrators as we can, so that we can change minds, we can change hearts, and then we can get schools to have that discussion, what's gonna work here, and then do that. Some of our schools have really embraced this idea of Envoy. This is, and I've got the voice. Former English, recovering English teacher. Envoy. It's nonverbal language. So how do we find a kid who's angry, who's escalated, and not escalate him anymore? How do we find a different way of teaching? Sunset Terrace, for instance, found that really works. We brought in people like Sam Simmons, who talks about historical trauma and how that affects so many of our kids in so many ways. Gage, for instance, has decided that's going to be their thing, that they're really going to learn more about historical trauma. And how do you work with kids who are dealing with that? We have,
Jean, can I just interrupt for a second? So
Yeah.
I hear the appeal to emotion. I hear you saying these are the things that the district is doing. And I think everybody in this room honestly believes that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because we should be participating in this as well. understands that the district has tried and has had methodology and has installed things like Envoy, and it's worked well in one school, and we don't have evidence that it's worked well in another school. And I think that what we would like to see happen is that we have tangible, measurable results. And without data, we don't have an opportunity to measure those tangible, measurable, and longitudinal results in comparison to when a school receives its Envoy training to 2 or 3 years later when we notice there's still massive racial disparities in all these categories. And so I hear that we have tried and we're working and we have feelings about it, but we need results, and so do the kids. And I think that's what we're working on, right?
And come on, and that's maybe where the communication breaks down, because the names of the people that I've just given you in this district, they will tell you that to try to measure a particular program like that and decide this program got these results, it doesn't work. It's like saying, what makes a family successful? Is it that they have dinner at 6 o'clock together every night? They will tell you that that thinking doesn't work. That metric
Systems and environment
doesn't work,
don't matter.
because culture isn't just one thing. It's not just Envoy. It's how those teachers in that building, how that community, how those parents are embracing a whole kind of cultural change. So when you talk about data, and I get that, but Michael Rodriguez, who is the data guy, he would tell you exactly, I took his class, he would tell you exactly what I'm telling you, is that of course we need data, but you can do correlations until the cows come home. This goes with this, but it doesn't tell you causation. And they would say, and you can read the books, you can talk to these people, that that's not what's important. Now, we're collecting data, PBIS data, which is how we report the discipline disparities. And we're doing a better job of that, because at first we didn't have a systemic understanding of what a referral was and what it should mean. So we're doing better with that now. And we can give you that, but
I think the point of this though, Jean, the thing that we're trying to come up with is how do we get those requests to you? Because the very first request we made as a team, committees, was no for all of the reasons that you've explained. But as a committee, then we don't know how to request or what to request or when to request, because those lines are not clear. And so I think the point of this conversation is to try to identify how,
Process.
what, when, and then what do we do when the answer is no? And in this case, I think, I don't want to speak for the data team, but I've heard them share that they have some strong feelings about they do need some information. And so, they made the request to have a conversation about data, and that request was denied. And so as a committee, we need to know what are our options, the who, what, when, and how of making requests, and all requests, not just the data requests. I think we've kind of gotten stuck on that because that was our first request and it was denied. But that request, and also the request to go to John Adams, also the request to interview teachers, also the request, all of those requests that the subcommittees would like to do work on. How do we go about requesting that, and how do we handle it when there's a disagreement?
so, good question, and we actually have a form now, a draft of a form that we can use for that. But Kim, I gotta tell you that the school board, for instance, does not have the authority to walk into a building and to interview teachers. We don't have that authority, we're a governance board. So we can't give this committee that authority. When we have a request for anything, we have to go through the superintendent. Generally speaking, we don't go right to cabinet members. I mean, that's not part in our, we don't have the authority. And I get it that it's frustrating. But
Well, and I'm not even saying that's frustrating, I'm saying we just need to know the process.
right,
I mean,
so
I'm not.
maybe this would be a good time to talk about that process. But the point that I was trying to get across here is that we have buildings working really, really hard to do better. They're doing a variety of different things. We had a report a couple months ago from Kellogg and from Banner Valley and from another school who sort of made up their own thing. It's an amalgam. You know, we provided these tools and they sort of decide they're gonna pick and choose what works for their building, for their kids, for their families. And they've seen some results and they reported those. But it's not just one thing. And if this group is gonna continue to be a subcommittee of the school board, we don't have the authority, we can't give you the authority to just say, yep, have at it, walk into the schools and talk to whoever and interview people, because we can't do that. Now, there have been times I'd like to.
There's four hands up. First we have Estelle, then Ray, then Tyler, then Mary.
Well, thank you very much for bringing us to the agenda item, because that was one of the things that I want to do. I'm of the opinion that we're putting the cart in front of the horse here. We're getting a sense of, you can't do this, you can't do that, you won't do this, there's rules, you gotta go through that. Before we've even had a discussion, a real discussion in front of the community, the whole thing to say, this is what we're looking for and this is why. We need information, and if every time we come, it's no for whatever reason, and it's a different reason every time, we're never gonna get anywhere. I certainly won't be able to do my work. We won't be able to do our work. This community focus team is gonna be useless to you in the district's endeavor to reach its goal. So all we're saying right now is let's just stick to the agenda item, which is what is your process? Now, I would start off by saying, you just mentioned one key thing that you can't do this, and although I've seen it, I've seen board members go directly to principals and cabinet members and all of that. But as a rule, you're not supposed to do that. So there must be other rules that are absolute no-nos that we should know in advance. That aside, what is the process that you would like us to follow to elevate either an issue or a request so that we can move forward? That's what we need to start discussing right now.
So we've got a draft for that, and we've taken most of the language from the charge that this group came up with.
You folks,
We'd love to see it.
Ray, Heidi, Mary, do you have
Oh,
any?
sorry.
I don't have anybody else.
Well, just the fact that you're talking, the board is a policy management board.
Right.
There's a good chance not everybody knows what that means. I was on the board of the diversity council, that's how we did it with the Carter model. I don't know if they're still using that or not. So I understand what that means, but again, then, given that that's true, agree with the stuff.
Well, and
Policies are
sorry,
made by people.
and just to respond to that,
What
thanks
do you-
for bringing up policy.
Policies are made by people and can be
We completely broke
changed.
policy. The way this is supposed to work for a subcommittee of the board, is the board and or the cabinet is supposed to come up with this idea for a committee to fill out the charge statement, to determine the parameters, to get it approved, and then to select community members. Now, because this district has had a long and sort of squalid history in terms of, well, you know the history. I mean, we blew it the last time around when we had a committee coming in and basically you brainstorm and then get ignored. We blew it the last time. So we were determined there are a group of people who really want to do better. We'd let you come up with the charge. It's not policy to do it that way. And I think that's maybe one of the issues we're dealing with right now. I think that if the board had come up with a charge statement with a goal for this committee, it would have been to engage community members in supporting the efforts of our schools to provide students and their families resources necessary to succeed regardless of ethnicity, race, SES, religion, disability, or gender, to support our schools.
Jean, I'm sorry.
Okay, I had my hand up.
Right.
You
It's about time.
and the rest of the board overwhelmingly approved
Yes,
our charge statement.
we did.
Don't tell us to rewrite now,
No.
when we haven't done anything.
No, Carl, Eric, what I'm saying is, we already broke our own policy because we respect who you are, the experience you've had. I'm not saying rewrite it. But what I am saying is that maybe there's just this disconnect between people who think that our schools are really hopelessly racist, with racist teachers, and that it's, and this is what I'm getting from staff, and it's tough to respond with them, that our district doesn't believe that, and you're saying, but CFT seems to.
Mary, you had your hand up. Did you-
Well, I'm going to ask first a general question. So are you saying that at this time, each school it has an amalgam of, they're just choosing from a menu of some sort that they know of how they're addressing racism in their school?
There are absolute parameters, there are absolute expectations. But what we discovered is that what works in one building may not be the thing that works the best in another building.
So that's what you're saying, that each school can do it differently. So it, and who has this?
As long as they are laser focused on achievement and.
Okay, I just want the answers to these questions. So the second one is, who has the authority to approve each school's plan to address racism in their school?
There are equity teams at the schools and the principal, and then we have equity specialists. We have Afolabi Branchaway, who meets with building principals once a month to go over their discipline data. If there are teachers there, for instance, who seem to be kind of out of whack in terms of the number of referrals, there's a discussion. We just are in the process of hiring a paraprofessional trainer, because we know that our paraprofessionals need more support and more work in terms of how they deal with kids of color.
Okay, then my final question. If every school is doing it differently, essentially, according to what's felt to be by their staff and their principal and whatever, and they're taking different methods that I'm not clear what all of the choices are. How can you ever, with all the data that you said you're collecting, how can you ever know what the effect of any one thing in any school is? How can you have any? It's like doing a medical study on a group of people and not knowing anything about them, and then it's not valid. So I'm wondering, given that every school is different, and what does the data mean to you? I mean, really, and how can you take that data and glean any information that you can meaningfully apply to another school?
Our schools talk with each other a lot. They compare notes about what's working in terms of hard data, hard facts. What the experts would tell you is it doesn't work this way. These schools are not factories. Our kids are not widgets.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
But that's the thing, and I know that's a tough thing to hear because we're data driven. But the thing is, when we're talking about not just a program, and these guys would all say it's not the program, it's the people. If you can, the school board broke the rules in breaking the policy. Well, it was the right thing to do. So how do you measure that? I'm sorry, I'm lost.
Can I say something about the policy piece specifically? Sure. Policies are made by people. People can change policy. So just can we move on from that?
Yeah, I don't know. I agree.
Okay, so Jean, respectfully, we've been at this for over a year, the second time around, and you all have been at all of our meetings, hearing what we've been talking about and how we're doing it and what we want to do. And we've been chugging along, making progress. So I thought. We get to the point where now we get to start doing work, and it seems like staff is completely surprised at what we want to do. So I'm really confused on what you actually thought our purpose was. And I do believe that you all seem to be a little bit more hung up on the actual data than we are. We're trying to get to a process, and yes, we'd like to see the data, but like as we've discussed in the planning team when we were like, we should bring this to the whole CFT, we're looking at, again, process on how you're collecting data. We don't need any extra numbers than what anybody else is getting. Nobody has ever said we need to go talk to teachers in the school. That's, correct me if I'm wrong, nobody ever said that.
Somebody just said it in passing, I think.
But like, yeah, just examples of things. So I'm just trying to figure out like, what did you think that we were actually looking to do?
We need extra numbers, we need additional data, different data sets and that type of thing. We have been told we want to go in and evaluate each of the programs, the professional development programs.
So I'm sorry, let me rephrase, because yes, those are things that we would like to look at, maybe down in the long run or whatever, but it's like secondary to figuring out how we're supposed to do this. And instead of getting to that point, it keeps being thrown up that we're not ever going to have the data. Okay, fine, we got it. But like, I'm trying to figure out what you keep saying that the mission, if you would have done it differently, it would have been stated differently. So like, you've been here.
Because I would like kind of similar clarification in the sense of this adversarial relationship.
I thought we were all good, really.
Nothing from our first ask, from the first ask that we made of the district. Now, and we are seen as adversaries, which doesn't make any sense. We've talked entirely for a year or longer about working with the district to support the district. We have that language in everything that we've written. And now all of a sudden, after our first ask, the entire district looks at the CFT in an adversarial way. How did that happen? We didn't do that.
Come on, I gotta tell you, some of the social media stuff is killing us here. I don't know, as a board member, how to go back to the teaching staff when they're saying, you know what, I just read a bunch of racist teachers teaching racist teachers, and it's a failed experiment. I don't know how to tell them that I don't feel that way, because this is a board, it's a board committee.
The students.
If students have feelings that they are being called racist, let me finish, I give you the time. People are feeling, teachers are feeling that they're being perceived as racist. That's a real big step back, because we shouldn't be there at this point if everybody's so dedicated to addressing the problem. So I don't know where that is coming from. If someone is lambasting somebody through social media, you know who those people are. Go to them. Do not put it on this group, because it's not everybody. Go to those people, because I know who you're talking about. Go to those people and say what you're doing is wrong. Pull them to the side and talk to them, but don't lay that on us. And as for us being here waiting because the Office of Civil Rights said this district has a racial disparity problem, not economic, not free and reduced lunch, not racial disparity problem. That is why our charge focuses on racism. And I will agree with Reverend over there. If you broke the policy, you did it of your own accord. No one begged you to do it. No one begged you to do it, and you approved it. So all of what you're saying is nice to know, but it's irrelevant to what we're trying to do here today, Gene. And we just please get back to what is the process that we're going to employ.
We had 2 hands up over here.
Sorry, it's my first time here, so I don't want to speak for this group. I'm sort of more of an observer, but I am a student in the district, and I've been a student my entire life in this district. And from what I can see today, it seems that a lot of these hostile feelings are more because people on one side may feel that there are issues and feel that there is no avenue to approach those issues alongside the school board. And I just want to say, as a female person of color student in this district, sometimes we do feel that there are issues that need to be addressed, and there is no avenue for us to navigate in order to bring up issues. Obviously, we don't all feel that all of our teachers are racist towards us. I have some of the best teachers I've ever had now, but I think that we struggle with having the opportunity to approach issues to higher organizations like the school board, because there is no way to do so. And I think the power of this group was that we would be able to come here and bring up issues and have the group bring those issues up to the school board in a proactive way. And it seems that there's a breakdown between the two groups. So I think the overall question is, what is the avenue this group is supposed to take in order to address the issues that we as students bring up in the district?
And I don't mean to be condescending, but putting mouths to things. That's exactly, I love that you just said that. And I'm hoping that this group will be back to just bring it to the meeting and let us have it. What do we need to know? But also to go to the community and listen to them and find out what do other community members like you have to say. Remember, do you want to talk about
Just one more
draft
statement.
process? Okay.
Let's go right, and then we'll come back, and then we'll go process.
Yeah, and a lot of what others have said, but I mean, if teachers feel they're being accused of being racist by this committee, by this group.
Yes, exactly.
This group spent about 10, and to me, extraordinarily frustrating months talking about ourselves and our self-organization. Only within the last 3 months have we actually talked about any content at all, period. We have produced 0 documents. I mean, 0. There is nothing that any teacher in Rochester can look at that the community focus team has produced that supports what you're saying their feelings are. If indeed teachers are feeling this way about this team, they are being misinformed. If you know somebody, I don't look at social media, I've got like 4 friends on Facebook, and that's all I want. But if indeed social media, and you are aware of people, individuals on social media, that are spreading incorrect information about this committee, I'm not going to go with the spell on there that you talk to them. We need to talk to them, and if it's within this group, we need to have that discussion within this group. Are there individuals who've had a hard time and strong feelings? I think it's perfectly reasonable that those get discussed within the group. But the final product is what we will all be accountable for, and so far there is 0 final product. So again, if any teacher is feeling that this group is talking badly about them, they are sadly misinformed. I would like to know who is misinforming them.
Well, and thank you for that. It's from this group. And
Well, then we
it
need to know.
helps to know that that isn't the general consensus.
Well, you've been in all the meetings, and you should know that.
Thank you.